Hi, I'm Eddie Aldrete, host of the podcast Beyond the Bite. On Saturday, May 3rd, San Antonio voters went to the polls to choose who they wanted to be the next mayor of San Antonio. So on Monday, May 5th, I sat down with Rob Killen and Erin Bley, two City Hall insiders, to take a look back at the election to see what happened and what's likely to happen in the June 7th runoff. Here now is my conversation with Rob Killen and Erin Bley. Erin, Rob, thanks for joining us. We've got a lot to talk about, and so let's just start off at the top in the mayor's race. So first of all, Rob, I'll start with you. What was your overall take on the mayor's race?
Eddie, thank you for the invitation. My overall take was it was surprising. It was not what we expected certainly 6 months ago or a year ago going into this. Obviously, the outsiders coming in, the amount of money they brought from outside San Antonio, and the impact that that had on the election certainly could not have been predicted when we first went into this. The other piece of it, of course, was the very low turnout. A total of 100,000, 101,000 people voted in the mayor's race, as opposed to 137,000 or so 2 years ago, and as compared to the 760,000 people that showed up in November to vote in the presidential and congressional races. So most people in San Antonio stayed home. And I think the outsiders, the outside money, and the low voter turnout turned this into a race that no one could have predicted.
Erin?
I agree with everything Rob just said. He took all my talking points. But yeah, very big surprise. I think the hardest part for us is it was really hard to predict what was happening. Like, we saw the voter turnout was really bad, so we knew there were going to be some surprises, but we really thought some of the council candidates that were running would prevail, or at least have one of the spots, in the final two. So I think that was the biggest kind of surprise. And the early voting numbers, really favored districts 8, 9, and 10, which we thought would help, Manny and Courage and maybe Perry. So we're surprised that the two outsiders got on, but evidently the polls were right in this case, because we don't always trust the polls, and they were spot on. So when those early numbers came out on May 3rd on election night, we were like, wow, not what we expected. But here we are.
You referenced 8, 9, and 10 because historically, council districts 8, 9, and 10 produce somewhere between 55 and 60% of the vote.
Right.
And so that would tend to favor Councilman Courage, Councilman Manny Peláez, as well as former Councilman Clayton Perry, and then Rolando Pablos.
Right. Yeah. So, but that clearly wasn't the case and what we thought was going to happen.
Well, you're saying that wasn't the case, and Rob, you said it was a surprise, or it was a little surprising. And I think can we go back a year to when, maybe not even a year, let's go back 8 months. Weren't a lot of people in town assuming that John Courage had a very strong chance of getting into the runoff?
Absolutely. If you look at the turnout on May 3rd, 16,000 people voted in the District 9 race. John Courage has consistently gotten 15 to 20,000 votes or so in his reelection campaigns. It's been higher, it's been lower, but going into this, we would have thought that John would have had 15,000 votes. People who've already voted for him 4 times before. He ended up with about 5,000 or so votes. So that was a real shock. Did John Courage dropping back in make a difference? He dropped out the day before Thanksgiving, dropped back in on Valentine's Day, which was the last day to register to vote.
The hour before the registration ended.
the very last moment, when the rest of us were out there buying flowers and candy for our spouses, John was deciding to run, to jump back into the mayor's race. But a year ago, based on the constituency he built over an 8-year period, he should have been one of the frontrunners.
But I do think him getting back in the race clearly hurt Manny Peláez and Adriana Rocha Garcia.
Well, let's talk about Dr. Adriana Rocha Garcia, because Councilman Courage had endorsed her.
Correct.
Once he pulled out of the race, he endorsed her. A, it was Valentine's Day. B, he's calling her to let her know he's withdrawing his endorsement. On the day and at the moment, she's in the hospital with her mother, and she's trying to translate the doctor's comments from English to Spanish so her mother can understand when the phone rings, and it's Councilman Courage. So it was a very chaotic day for her.
For her, yeah. I think it was a big shock probably not only to her, but yeah, also Manny and the others that were running. It's like, what is the point of getting back in? And then he got back in and didn't really do much with his campaign. Didn't have an event, didn't raise any money. What was that total, $5,000 or something?
I think we saw
a couple small signs. We never saw a big sign. So, but based on voting trends and the popularity in District 9, we thought, hey, maybe he still would have a chance.
So a big difference. Again, I want to go back to the fall. I think people were hearing about Gina Ortiz-Jones, but at that point, people weren't including her in the top two because nobody really knew. There was a lot of talk about the young tech entrepreneur, Beto Altamirano. He had a lot of money. He ended up spending that money in a variety of ways. And, Councilman Peláez, there were a lot of people that thought Manny might be able to do it as well, and that not to assume that he would be stuck to the fundraising numbers that he was showing, that he would be able to get some more money, which he loaned himself. And to your point, John Courage was a factor, and then Clayton Perry kind of steps in, and people start wondering, well, he's a former councilman from District 10. Might he be able to pick up support, or is, his alcohol-related incident too much of a stumbling block, as well as the fact, would he be more of a spoiler than someone who can be a true viable candidate?
Yeah, well, and it never really came up on the election trail or in the media. We knew he was running. We saw him at events, and his name was on things. But I was very surprised that it didn't go more negative, about him and his history running for mayor. So that's good for him. But if you look at how many votes he got, I'm just glancing. If you look at what Clayton and Courage got total, that would have pushed third or fourth place into first or second place. So it took a big chunk.
And we haven't talked about Melissa Cabello-Haverda.
It's true.
Also a factor. So of the 8 strong candidates, those that had money or name ID or had served on or were serving on city council, how much did they cannibalize each other's votes? Did some people who would have voted for Adriana vote for Melissa as a Latina who is currently on council and has that experience and represents western portion of the city, with Adriana on the south and Melissa on the north, but really sharing a border with their council district? And so the same thing, we saw those dynamics with Clayton, with John Courage, and with Manny Peláez, where they all shared the north side. And so I think after this election, after everything settles down, it'll be interesting to go out and poll voters on those questions. Would you have voted for Manny if John Courage wasn't in the race? Or would you have voted for Clayton if John Courage wasn't in the race? And trying to figure out how people made those decisions is something we're going to have to spend the next few months unpacking.
Well, and I think Beto started very early. I think he was one of the earliest, right after Courage, right? So he had a long path to go and was very good at fundraising, had a lot of big names behind him, and was very energetic and seemed to really have a lot of momentum. Also, his social media game was extremely strong.
I don't know that anyone could hold a candle to his social media.
No, you would look. I would compare with the other people running, and I just couldn't believe it. So he really seemed to have a following, and I think he still kept that following probably through to the end. And a lot of young people were very, excited about him, and he's very charismatic. So you meet him and you talk to him, you're like, wow, he could really be mayor, But I think the long trek and the long campaign, maybe it hurt in the long run.
And I think Beto, of all the people who ran for mayor, is someone who has a political career ahead of him.
Agree.
And so the real question as we go into runoffs is, where do Beto's supporters go? If you were a supporter of Beto, do you lean towards Gina, or do you lean towards Rolando? And that's hard to say. Some of Beto's supporters in the business community, you had a number of folks in the business community who believe in economic development, I think they're going to be Rolando supporters. And I think there are a lot of folks that supported Beto who are younger voters, maybe new voters, who are going to support Gina. And what does Beto do with that coalition that he built?
Yeah, what do they all do? Are there going to be endorsements that come out from,
I don't know what they're going to do. That's
Right.
why I invited the two of you on this podcast.
Well, clearly, we still don't know a lot. It's May 5th. We're getting there.
So I want to go back, Rob, to your comment about Melissa Cabello Havrda and Adriana Rocha Garcia. They're both strong leaders. Melissa's an attorney. Adriana's has a PhD, former university professor. Melissa's a disabilities attorney, civil rights attorney. And they both showed that leadership, I think, on council. And there were questions about, would they cannibalize from each other? And then the question also, as Gina entered the race, is how would three Hispanic females, their policies step on each other and cannibalize? And so I think that's a real challenge. With Beto, would you agree with the statement, I've heard some people say this, that it's not so much the end of the campaign as it is the beginning of his movement?
Yes, I completely agree.
Because he did seem to have a strong following.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's exciting to see what comes next for him. Yeah, and he even said, I'm young. I saw his speech on Saturday, on election night, and he said, I'm young. This is just the beginning, and he's right. I mean, he's got enough following now. I don't know where that leads him next, but clearly he will be around for sure.
So I think, so Rob, you started down this path already, and that's, what happens now in the runoff. I know phone calls are already being made between Gina and Rolando. Gina and Rolando making phone calls to the candidates that didn't make it in hopes of attempting to earn their support. So I think in the coming days, we're going to start hearing who's going to endorse and who's not. Erin, I want to go back to, you talked about the polls. You said the polls were right. So I want to go back. There were two UTSA polls that came out. And then there was Gina released a summary of her internal poll, which showed her in first place and Rolando in second place. The UTSA, the most recent UTSA poll showed Rolando in second place. Mm-hmm. The first one,
he was way at the bottom.
Yeah, he was way at the bottom. Then this most recent Blueprint poll, which I'm not familiar with them, and they're out of state, but they basically said the runoff will be between Gina and Rolando. So if you look at the arc of all the polls, while the numbers may have changed, they were all fairly consistent with Gina and Rolando being competitive. Mm-hmm. Would you agree?
Yes, definitely agree. And again, there was lots of conversations. Do we believe the polls? Is the polling data correct? Because we were still thinking, well, how could it be not a council person gets in the runoff? But clearly the polls were correct, across the board. And Rolando made a big movement from that first initial poll all the way up. So what did he do to make that happen?
So let's talk about money, because I think that, Rob, you made the comment that, at the very outset, we were all maybe a little surprised that the three outsiders went to the top of the leaderboard. And there's two things you need in a campaign. You need reach and you need frequency. So the candidates that had the money had the ability to use reach to get to a wide swath of voters. And then again, the ones with the most money had the ability to repeat that messaging over and over and over and over again. And so I think it was definitely a factor in their ability to raise money. You also discussed John Courage dropping out and jumping back in. But the other thing about John Courage was his lack of fundraising. He announced in January, and then by the July financial report, he had only raised like $5,000 over a 6-month period. Mm-hmm. So what's your take on the money issue?
I think John Courage went in with several natural advantages, right? He had a constituency that had voted for him 4 times before, just as a city councilman, and he'd run for office for various offices over the years. So he had strong name ID. He has a great name. Who wouldn't want to vote for someone named Courage? And so that's a natural advantage. and working very closely with those neighborhood groups. I think he didn't aggressively try to raise money. I think he tried to raise money where he could, but I think that may have also been a bit of an advantage for him in that he wasn't spending all of his time on fundraising. He was spending his time with those neighborhood organizations and out there talking to constituents. He didn't get very many votes at the end of the day. And I think if he'd stayed in the campaign, if he hadn't dropped out, he would have maintained those relationships and would have turned out stronger. Would he have made the runoff? Based on what we now see with hindsight being 2020, probably not, but he would have done much better on Election Day, in my opinion.
And I think in this election, especially, money did play a huge factor when it comes to mailers, TV ads, social media, having great newsletter updates. The top two, Rolando and Gina, they both had great, newsletters. There were updates. I got something from Gina Ortiz-Jones almost every single day in my inbox, and I was impressed by the way it looked. And I think having that money to do, to really cover the wide swath of the city where the other candidates couldn't, really played a factor. I think I got 5 or 6 mailers from Rolando Pablos. And I think the PACs had a lot more to do with this race than ever before because we weren't really sure of the influence and the money, how it was being spent across the different candidates, and it clearly helped the top two.
Now, your communications from Gina, was that digital? Emails?
Emails.
Okay.
Emails.
And then Rolando was the...
Emails as well. Yeah.
Okay.
And mailers. Yeah. But both were, Gina was, and I even told her, I said, it's really impressive, your emails and concise. And I think it was almost every day there at the end. But then Beto had a great social media game, on Instagram.
So I guess, Rob, going back to your comment about surprising, the one surprising factor for me was, considering her limited budget, how well Adriana Rocha Garcia did and how poorly, I guess, Councilman Manny Peláez performed. I think a lot of people were expecting him to do better, especially when he lent himself that $300,000 and some odd thousand.
I think there's a conventional wisdom that endorsements really don't matter that much. But Adriana was endorsed by the San Antonio Express-News. She has a long history of serving on council, and I think that made a difference, even without spending much money. On the flip side of it, Manny has a long history of leadership in this community on various boards, commissions, chamber, and spent a lot of money and obviously had an infusion of $324,000 into his campaign at the tail end and should have performed better. In fact, if you'd asked me a year ago, I would have said he's going to be in the runoff. And so it is surprising, especially since so many people voted in District 8. His constituents voted for the District 8 race that would have theoretically voted for him. It's hard to say at this point why he didn't perform as well as he should have. So I'd say he underperformed and Adriana overperformed, considering her resources.
Yeah, if you look at the numbers in District 8, over 12,000 people voted. In District 4, a little over 5,000 people voted. So Adriana made up a huge percent of people not from her district, which is a tremendous effort, I think, on her part, especially with the grassroots campaign. But she's very likable. Everyone thought she'd be a great mayor. It was just too crowded of a race. It's kind of like, couldn't you just stay on council, 2 more years and then see? But, once she was in and very committed. She did a really good job at, all the events I went to. I thought she did a great job.
I think it's a really good point, Erin, and we haven't talked about that, is you have 27 people on there, and most of them don't have the resources or the name ID to be mayor. But when you get into the voting booth and you have to flip through the ballot to find the person you're supporting, Rolando's at the top of the list, and Adriana was number 9, I believe. Can't remember. She was fairly far down.
Melissa was 25.
And Melissa was 25. And so in a race this close with this low a turnout, where you ended up on a ballot with 27 or 26 other people, I think mattered.
I shared this story the other night that we went out on Friday evening, May 2nd, to celebrate my oldest son's birthday, Christian, and we went to a Japanese barbecue restaurant. And, if you've ever been to one of those restaurants, you get this menu and there's, 374 different things that you can choose and combinations. And it'll make you just freeze because of the overwhelming amount of choices you have. And as I was looking at that menu, it hit me that a lot of people who aren't involved in day-to-day politics, like the three of us are, may have felt that same way in the mayor's race with 27 candidates, and you may not know them, the bulk of them. And so I think moving forward, do you think San Antonio is ready to have the conversation about what it takes to get on the ballot to run for mayor?
100%. Things have got to change. And it was different this time because we had an open seat, which we haven't had in years.
16 years.
16 years. Rob always remembers the date. 16 years. But we've got to figure out something that works better. And I can't tell you how many conversations I had up until Election Day with so many of my friends that were so confused. They wanted to go vote. They knew, they know what district they're in, so they're voting for their council person, but they needed advice on mayor. They really didn't know. They knew a couple of the names maybe, but I was just so surprised at how many of my smart friends didn't know what to do. Or they were just like, you know what, I'm just not going to vote, and we'll wait and see what happens in the runoff, which I think a lot of people did. But are they going to go vote again on June 7th? That's the problem.
Well, it's a story. Erin and I were at a local university speaking to a group of students, and only one in that group could actually name our current mayor, and none of them planned on voting in this election. And these are folks in their, 19, 20, 21. They were juniors and seniors.
And they didn't even know if they could vote. They didn't know if they were residents of San Antonio, if they were able to vote. But they did know, one guy knew it was Ron, and then someone said Ron with the arms.
Yes.
So
couldn't remember his last name, but
there was no last name.
No last name with the arms.
And they were all smart kids, we thought.
Smart and upperclassmen, smart kids.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, they weren't engaged.
I bet that a lot of them were very engaged in November in the presidential election. Whether they voted or not is a different issue, but I bet you they were loud and they were vocal and they knew the candidates.
I think so. Like I had said earlier, nearly 760,000 people voted in Bexar County in the November elections, and here we had 100,000 people or so voting for mayor. So who can say? You look at and compare this to the Alma bond, which passed overwhelmingly. It was a simple, clear, up or down vote, yes or no. And what it brought in the Alma bond was $1 billion of capital investment in higher education in San Antonio. So simple message, easy, and people knew what their choice was.
So let's move into the council races. Of the 4 open council seats, only one was able to win without a runoff, and that was Edward Munguia in District 4. Mm-hmm. He is somebody that's been around City Hall quite a lot, having worked for different members, and I think it was a bold statement of his years of outreach over the years and constituent service. I think the bold sign of confidence in his candidacy.
He grew up in District 4. He's worked in District 4, as you said, for various council members. Adriana was supporting him, and she got a lot of support herself. And so it was a known quantity. And so I thought that was, of all of the open seats, that one was the most obvious one, right. I believe, going into that.
He's also a genuinely nice guy. It's someone you want to work with. Like, we're very excited to have Edward on council to continue all the great work in District 4. So I think he, worked his sphere of people and got out to all the events. We had him at several things with us, meeting people, and he's just a very likable guy. So I think he'll be a good addition. And he won by almost 57% in District 4. But they also didn't have a lot of voters.
All right, so in the other open seats, let's go to District 6 next. These two, Kellyanne and Gonzalez and Rick Galvan, came in neck and neck. Mm-hmm. They were above the others, but very, very close. District 8, I don't think it was a huge surprise. Ivelisse Mesa Gonzalez and Paula McGee. Ivelisse coming in with a little bit of a 2-to-1 ratio. Paula was barely nudged in there above Saqib.
Right.
And then in District 9, Misty Spears and Angie Taylor Aramburu. I think Misty was about 38, Angie about 36, so fairly neck and neck.
Very close.
And that, like the mayor's race, is probably going to be a little bit partisan because you've had some partisan support, involvement, and engagement in that District 9 runoff race. And then let's go to District 1. It wasn't one of the open seats, but that was one, I think, were you surprised that Sook barely avoided having to be in a runoff, so she is in a runoff. She came out with about 49% of the vote, but she had, what, 8 or 9 opponents?
9 opponents.
9 opponents.
Yeah,
Opponents.
in total.
And so now she faces Patty Gibbons. But that one is like Sook came in at 49 and Patty has like 17. So that's a big.
Yeah, we knew District 1 was probably going to be a runoff. It was going to be tough for Sook to win it outright. But I think the fact that she got 49% is huge and really helps her going into the runoff races. So, I think District 1 has historically had a lot of people always run for that seat. That's the hardest district, to be in charge of. But I think Sook's done a really good job, and I think the neighborhoods that really know her as a person, and she did a ton of block walking. She did it exactly the same way she won 2 years ago. Block walked every day, mailers, going to all the neighborhoods and events, and I think she did exactly what she needed to do. I mean, it really stinks. She barely missed it and has to go another month, but the results were not surprising to me.
Sook did a really good job. 9 opponents, and she almost did it without a runoff.
Right.
She has good staff. She's got a great zoning commissioner. She's been pro-business because she has developed her own. She's had to go to the city and pull permits, and she knows how difficult that is for the private sector, and has been fairly balanced in governing. So I thought she did a really, really good job. Patty Gibbons came in second and is in Greater Harmony Hills, which was previously in District 9. Patty had run for the District 9 seat against John Courage years ago, and now got moved into District 1, so she decided to run as the District 1 candidate. But it's a new neighborhood for District 1, so I don't know how deep her outreach will be in the balance of District 1.
And she's clearly had said she's running as the conservative candidate in District 1, so you could say that's also a partisan race, even with the runoff, with the incumbent.
I would say that is how Patty is characterizing it, although I don't think this is necessarily a partisan race.
Right.
So when you look at the map that the Bexar County Elections Administrator put out to see, but in the mayoral race, where the support came from, you can clearly see that Rolando had some sprinkling across town, but his heavy pockets of support came from what looks to be like 8, 9, and 10. And so then you have to go, and Gina's is sort of all over, but probably not as strong in 8, 9, and 10. So now the question is, in the June 7th runoff, if there are runoffs in districts 1, 6, 8, and 9, how does that change the dynamic of the mayor's race? Rob?
I think that works to Rolando's advantage. And you look at the people that supported Manny and live in District 8, or now those District 8 residents are going to go back and vote in a runoff race between Paula and Evilise. And Manny talked about public safety. He talked about economic development. Those are the things that Rolando has talked about. John Courage, who lifelong Democrat, obviously left of center, but ran as a councilperson who focused on basic city services. That aligns with Rolando's message. So I think the north side turnout works to Rolando's advantage.
Erin, we talked about Beto being the best in social media, and I think of the council, John Courage developed the reputation of being the best at constituent service. That was one of his, I think, hallmarks, responding to people immediately on streetlights, potholes, and to your point, that's what you're there for. So, Erin, any thoughts on
No, I agree with Rob said. I mean, I think the majority of the votes in the runoff are going to come from the north side districts. If you look at historical patterns and who voted on May 3rd and in early voting, so I think definitely playing up to. But a lot of people vote in District 1. So if you focus on those 4 districts, it's going to be really interesting.
Obviously, everyone in the city can vote in the June 7th runoff, but you're going to have stronger turnout in the council districts that have runoff elections because there's more things to vote on. So it will play a factor, and we'll see what all that means. Rob, on a previous podcast, you made the statement about one of the best groups of new council members was Mark White from District 10, Marina Alderete Gavito from District 7, and Dr. Sukkur from District 1, because they came together. They were all very motivated. They were all very sharp. They were assertive and aggressive, and they didn't want to let their label of being a freshman hold them back. So they gelled rather quickly, and they seemed to work well together. So my question now is, after the June 7th runoff, with 4 new council members and a new mayor, how will that having a new mayor dynamic impact how quickly the council gels?
I think it's going to be more difficult this upcoming term for a couple of reasons. One, now you're a freshman and you've got a 4-year term ahead of you. 2, I think that the freshmen are going to be more ideological, more partisan in their approach in such a way that it impacts their ability to work with others. Now, all of that being said, I'm an optimist. I believe that once the new council members come in and find their footing and the new mayor figures out how to work with everybody, it's a council that could work together. Looking at who is in the runoff, I think there's opportunities to work together, but there is not a clear alignment like we saw with Mark, Marina, and Sook.
And I think, too, what's the most critical piece of all of this is how quickly, or not quickly, but how they choose their staff. From our perspective, working with staff is almost as important as the council person, if not as important. And I think coming in, and there's a lot of good staff people that will be up for grabs, and it's already begun, and everyone's talking to everyone. But I think the getting that staff in alignment, especially if they can inherit some staff people that were in that district before that have the historical knowledge in those relationships, like in District 8 and District 9, that'll really help them gel. And I think it's really going to depend on the mayor and how quickly they can get accustomed to being the leader and kind of bring everyone together with all the different personalities and get them maybe working more together instead of divided as they have done in the past couple of years.
Well, let's talk about the new mayor, because one of the strongest points of being mayor is the power of appointment. Right. And so the mayor's going to come in and start making committee assignments. So, Rob, how important is that, not only selecting the chair of the committees, but the members of the committees in order to help that move that mayor's agenda?
Well, Eddie, it's even more than that. It's selecting what committees exist.
Right.
A great example is Mayor Nurnberg dissolved the Intergovernment Relations Committee briefly and then brought it back. But he did that at the beginning of the last term. There was no IGR committee. So the mayor not only selects who chairs these committees, but which committees and how they're configured. So I think that is really important. The question is, does the new mayor create committees, reform committees, and then constitute committees based on experience and aptitude and area of interest for that council person who's serving as either chair or on that committee, or is it to pursue the mayor's own agenda? And we won't know that until day one.
And is the mayor going to honor kind of the seniority of the people that are already on council? So in the past, people, if they've already been on a committee for, 2 years, then they would get bumped up to chair. And so you would think the natural progression would be the current council people would kind of get bumped up or have the appointments that they'd like to have, or the ones that are already on, and then you fit in the new people. So it's going to be interesting. But again, it's the mayor's discretion, so they can decide how they want to do it.
I think, though, the way committees function at City Hall now is different than they did a couple of years ago. And part of that has to do with the CCR process. That is the council consideration request, or what's called the 5-signature memo, where 5 council members sign a memorandum saying we would like this piece of policy to move forward. And it used to be the case that would come forward to executive and
There was governance.
Governance.
Yeah.
Misstated. It would come forward to governance, and the governance committee would decide, really the mayor would decide whether legislation or policy would move forward. Now, with a change to that practice, all proposed CCRs come forward and get assigned to committees, which I think makes the committee structures even more important than they were 2 years ago.
So there was it Councilman White that did a CCR on CCRs, on the CCR
Yes.
process?
Yes.
And because there were things that were languishing in governance, and he went back and looked at the charter, and the charter said it needs to be brought up at the next available governance meeting for discussion and for assignment to a particular committee.
Mark worked with the mayor and with City Manager Eric Walsh
yes.
to come up with a policy that made sense. So ultimately, the CCR and CCRs resulted in a process that everyone agreed to. What that means is that the committees might be a little more clogged because they have to consider everything, but it means that everyone's idea gets an airing.
Gets heard at some point. All right, so let's now talk about what the big issues that this new city council, once they're all sworn in, they'll get sworn in June, and then we'll have limited council meetings in July. I know certain things still happen, but public council meetings, they take a little bit of a breather. What would you identify is Project Marvel at the top of the list of things that they're going to have to deal with?
I think so. I think that is the biggest investment of time and energy and money that we're looking at in the upcoming years. And we have the current council who has already indicated that they'd like to move forward on discussions, but now you're going to have a council that is brand new and nearly a majority that are new. And so whether they want to continue forward with Project Marvel remains to be seen. I would say that most of them, most of the ones who are in the runoff, have indicated that they are interested in keeping the Spurs in San Antonio. And to the extent that Project Marvel, at least the Spurs Arena aspect of Project Marvel is a component of that, there will be continued movement. The election for whatever the county decides to put on the ballot would be in November. At least that's what we're anticipating. So you'll have a city council that will get elected in June and will be seated in June, have 1 or 2 meetings, take the month of July off, come back in August, and November's right around the corner.
Right.
And so it's such a short fuse
Window.
for everyone to get
Short
on
runway.
the same page.
Well, and we don't really know with the new people coming on, what their views are on how much government should play a role in these large scale projects. There's been a history of all the different ones we've done, and they're all structured differently and different solutions. And I think this one kind of came out of the gate and got a lot of naysayers from day one. So they're kind of refocusing how it's going to go. But they're going to have to balance between what's happening at City Hall and City Council and financially with what their constituents want for Project Marvel, because they don't want to come in and get newly elected and make a vote that just immediately makes everyone mad.
And I think if you've seen the presentation on Project Marvel, I think a lot of people in the community and a lot of the hesitancy and pushback has been that they keep hearing $4 billion. It's a $4 billion project, and they, I believe, have a misunderstanding that they're going to go vote on a tax of $4 billion, which is not the case.
Right. I think it needs to be divided into chunks and shown how it can just work as separate projects and not all one big project. I think that's what they're doing now. The arena should be separate. Convention center separate. That's already funded. Alamo Dome's funded. So it's, carve it out and kind of show how it all could go.
Well, like the $300 million for the land bridge, that's coming from a federal grant.
Right.
So if the grant doesn't come, we don't build the land bridge.
Right.
So that's
or it could come later,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could come years down the road.
I think what we have seen over the months since those initial presentations were made to City Council is they have honed the message. City has honed its message. They have talked about the buckets of revenue and the buckets of cost with much more clarity than they had previously. The problem is getting that out to the voters. So if we're going to take a portion of hotel occupancy tax, the visitor's tax that the county previously used to pay for the Frost Bank Center and then pay for a variety of venues around town, educating the voters is going to be extremely important, especially for voters who live in far north, far south, far east, and far west Bexar County who will be asked to vote on it. And what it's going to take, in my opinion, is leadership at the city, leadership at the county, and coordination between the city and the county so that we don't see what we're seeing today, which is daylight between the two different entities.
There is, and it bothers a lot of people, and we need to get that fixed. And that's even by admission from the various people that are involved at the city and the county.
Well, hopefully a new mayor can help work on those issues.
I think that's important, that a new mayor and a new council can rebuild relationships with the county, because we've had a great synergistic relationship for many years between the city and the county, and that seems to have weakened recently.
So one of the other issues that's coming up is there seems to be a little bit of anxiety down at City Hall about the city's spending rate because it's at a higher number than what we're taking in. We're expecting to see some flat property tax appraisals and the unknown factors. If you look at the city of Laredo, there's a lot of anxiety in Laredo. Laredo is the largest port in the United States, and they're concerned about the impact on tariffs because they get what CPS Energy does for the city, provide us 1/3 of our city budget. The bridge revenues, the 4 international bridges, provide revenue to about 25% of their city. So question is, with all these new people coming on board, it seems like they're going to be hit with a little bit of a dose of reality that the piggy bank's not as big as we once thought it was, and we may have to, pull back.
Well, for sure. They're going to go straight into budget. In July, they'll get their preliminary budget and then budget meetings through all of August. And I think it's not a little concern. I think it's a big concern because every day there's something new happening at the federal level that's affecting us on the local level. And at the state, we don't know the outcome of all the, what the legislative session's going to end up being, and are they going to have multiple sessions? It's going to, I think it's definitely going to impact the overall budget. It's already affecting a lot of the nonprofits, and some of the bigger RFPs that the city normally would be on a cycle to do, they're kind of holding back or waiting to see on awarding some of those bigger contracts. So I think it's a big concern.
We've been very lucky in San Antonio, I would say, in terms of enjoying decent budget, decent revenue. We get sales tax as a city, we get ad valorem tax, but we also get a big portion of CPS, 14% of CPS revenue. And those have been up, so we've actually seen budget windfalls in recent years because energy costs have gone up, and yet energy rates are still relatively competitive compared to other major urban areas across the United States. And so as we lose ad valorem revenue, as we see limitations imposed by the state, and we can't increase CPS revenues, we're not going to, rates might go up, we can't gouge the ratepayers. So I think there's going to have to be some belt tightening at the city.
Well, they also put a cap on the CPS revenues. Once we hit a certain percentage over what they thought they were going to get, then that money goes back to CPS.
And that's a self-imposed.
That's a policy. Yeah, it's not an ordinance, and that's something that Councilwoman Cabello Havrda and White and Mayor Nirenberg all came together and agreed upon because it's the Capital Reserve Fund.
Right.
So that allows CPS, because previously what would happen is these windfalls would come in and everyone wanted to fund their pet projects.
Right.
And there was a desire. You can't blame CPS Energy when they need a rate hike and get after them because you're spending some of their revenue on your pet projects. So I think it was a wise decision to create the Capital Energy Fund, a reserve fund. And now before CPS, if they have a major project coming up, they want to build a nuclear plant, they want to buy a natural gas plant or do anything else like that, they start off with this fund here. Or if they need to raise rates by 3%, maybe they only raise rates by 2% or 1% because they've applied the reserve fund to that process.
Yeah. Well, the new ones coming in won't know what it was like before when they got that big pot of money, surprise money at the end of the summer to play with. So.
And while we're talking about CPS and SAWS, I think there are complexities in both both municipally owned utilities. CPS understanding both generation and distribution challenges that they have, as well as our available sources. CPS has made major strides under Rudy Garza. SAWS is dealing with, they can't find, they're losing 20 to 25% of their water, and that's a major issue. And we were recently highlighted in Texas Monthly Magazine for that particular issue. So I think the new council, one of the challenges for the new council the new council members will be to understand all the intricacies and complexities of both CPS Energy and SAWS.
Agree.
I think you're absolutely right. I think CPS is a great asset for the city of San Antonio. It's great for the citizens of San Antonio, and it's great for the business community, right? Because we have consistent power. Rudy has said that they are good on generation right now, that they have enough generation. But you're right, the transmission side of it is the thing that will hamper growth. On the SAWS side, they've got issues that I think are creating problems. Obviously, the 20-25% leakage, the cost of new infrastructure that ultimately gets transferred to new homeowners because they're bearing it in the form of impact fees
to the developers.
To the developers, but those fees to the developer get translated to the home buyer.
Right.
And so that makes housing to some extent less attainable because of the SAWS infrastructure cost. And until we figure out a way as a community to offset those increased infrastructure costs, I think it's going to be harder and harder for new areas that are served by SAWS to be, I think, reasonable in price. And so that's a real challenge there with SAWS is the infrastructure and the funding of the infrastructure.
Well, and the new members will have, be faced with appointing new board members for each utility, coming up pretty quick. So
4 new SAWS board members. One will be the mayor. Of course, we'll have a new mayor. And then 3 SAWS board members who are terming out May 31st.
You have Eduardo Barra, who's left, David McGee.
And Amy Hardberger.
Right.
Are
the three that are.
It's going to come up pretty fast. And so they'll get to see how political those appointments can be. And I think, though, bringing back the Municipal Utilities Committee as a council committee, I think that will help. Hopefully we'll get some of the new ones on there as well, and they can, really understand how the organizations operate.
One of the other big challenges potentially for this new council, there's a bill moving in the legislature by Senator Paul Bettencourt from Houston that will change how municipalities go out for bonds, because right now it takes a simple majority, and he wants to increase that to 60%. And if that bill passes, that would make it difficult. And then if it fails and you try to bring it back up, I think there's an even higher percentage, like 75, 80%, that you would have to have it passed by if you try to bring it back up after a failed election. So overall, the council is going to be facing a wide variety of challenges. All right, final question for the two of you. 2 questions. First question is, if Rolando Pablos were elected mayor, what advice would you offer him? Erin?
I guess the best advice would be, Rolando is very smart and he's very experienced. And I think he brings a lengthy experience like no other candidate to the office. So I think building upon all those different roles that he's had and economic development experience, bringing that immediately on day one to City Hall will be helpful. I think the quicker he can get his staff together and settled in and start working with everyone kind of as a whole and working on those individual council relationships will help him be successful.
Rob?
I absolutely agree with Erin. And I think the focus on economic development, particularly in the light of Jenna Salcedo Herrera announcing that she was leaving Greater SATX, it just emphasizes how important having folks with experience in economic development is for the growth of San Antonio and the entire region. And I think the mayor of San Antonio, and if it is Rolando, who has those experiences and international relationships that he can leverage to help build up San Antonio, is critically important.
And that we're going to save that for another episode, because in the same week that Jenna announced her departure, Mark Anderson announced that he was leaving Visit San Antonio. Two very important, high-profile roles in the community at the same time that we're getting a new mayor and 4 new council members. So it's a lot of change. Okay, same question for Gina Ortiz-Jones. Should she be elected mayor? Erin, what is your advice for her?
Same thing. I think Gina Ortiz-Jones is a really strong, powerful, determined woman leader, and she's proven that in the past. She's worked for 2 different presidential administrations in different roles, and I think she's going to bring a whole different aspect to the way business is done at City Hall. I think that bringing that down to the local level where people can understand it, because working at a higher level like that's a lot different than local government. So I think getting down to the day-to-day business at City Hall and not all the social type issues will be important. But same thing, important to hire the good staff, get them together, and hit the ground running on day one.
Rob?
Again, I agree with Erin. This is easy.
This is amazing.
I agree with Erin that hiring good staff is important. Gina doesn't have any experience working in municipal government, so I think she needs to get people around her who know that, build relationships with the council so that she can work with them. And then I would say that she can start building a relationship with the business community as well, which I think of between her and Rolando, she has less of a relationship with business leaders in town. So I think that'll be critically important to her success as well.
I would offer up my first piece of advice would be breathe. Take a breath between, the election and understanding what's at stake. This isn't your seat. It belongs to the people of San Antonio, and you're just temporarily holding it. Number 2 would be listen. Listen to a wide swath of voters, communities, neighborhoods, to understand that what works in one part of town may not work in another part of town. Number 3, understand who we are as a community. We're not Corpus Christi. We're not Laredo. We're not Dallas. We're not Brownsville. And so use the things that make us unique and special, and let's elevate those. There are a lot of people that love this city and love coming to the city and moving their companies to the city. So let's take a stronger look at what makes us so special and so unique and keep building upon that foundation.
Well, now they have 4 years to get settled in and start doing all the good work instead of 2 years. So I think that's going to be really beneficial.
I agree. I wish we had staggered terms because we're still electing all of them at the same time. Mm-hmm. But having 4 years to figure out where the bathroom is, figure out how the budget works, which is extremely complicated, and figure out all those pieces will make for better council members.
Rob Killen, Erin Bley, I thank you again for joining us for this episode, although next time I think I need different people because you guys agree way too much.
Yes, or with cocktails, preferably.
Great idea. We're going to do a special episode of Beyond the Bite After Hours.
All right.
All right.
We'll be
thank
there.
you.
Thank you.
Beyond the Bite is a production of Aldrete Strategic Partners. Audio editing is by Nick Chamberlain of Every Word Media, and video production is by Matt Nelson of Peachtree Rose Marketing. That does it for this episode. We appreciate you tuning in. Please join us again next time, and as always, we thank you for listening.